Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, where we simplify the complexities of your leadership journey. My name is Mo, and I'll be sitting in the host chair today. I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Gregory Weinger. Greg is a seasoned executive leader known for taking people beyond the operational excellence of their jobs. Greg has a reputation for fostering cultures of innovation, mentoring rising leaders, and bridging vision with execution. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mo. Great to be here.
Yes, sir. I would love to talk about the origins, the early part of your leadership. What first inspired you to take on leadership roles, and who were some of the earliest role models in your leadership?
All right, I'll take you back. So I started out, I came out of school, and it was the dawn of World Wide Web. And I just got really fascinated by coding. I was writing code, building websites, doing all these things. And I wanted to get more serious about it. And so I started to get some engineering roles. And one of the things I realized was that, the things that we were building didn't always make sense to me. It was like, well, we could do it better or this, that. I was always trying to think about how we could do things better. And it wasn't always just what you're building. It's just like how we're building, how we're getting along. And so I kind of had an inkling before too long that I wanted to get into the leadership side. But I actually ran into a lot of resistance when I started sharing this with bosses and people, and they're like, "Really, you?" It was almost like so. I got this feedback that I wasn't really presenting like a leader, and there was something in me that always felt like, well, I'm not that kind of a leader. Like, there's another way to lead, but I didn't really honestly see a lot of role models very early on. And so I actually, at that point in my career, kind of went in this opposite direction of, okay, well, I have to emulate what they're doing. And so, I would practice, and I had to become more direct and more assertive and, promote myself more. And so I think I did what a lot of introverts end up doing, is that you start putting on a mask of, of being an extrovert. And so I got pretty good at it, and so I progressed through my, my career. But then I started to notice there are people out there who had a little bit of different mode. I had one role model. He was the second in command at a company I worked with. And he would sit in a meeting and he would just say nothing. And it was kind of unnerving because, towards the end of the meeting, he was going to speak and, you didn't always want to hear what he had to say. But because whatever it was really carried a lot of weight, because he would let everyone talk everything out, and he'd be thinking about things. And then, he'd pause before he'd speak, and then he'd speak. And it really carried a lot of power. And so that gave me a little bit more idea, more was going on there. The story goes on, but that's some of my early career events and role models.
Greg, can you tell my audience an early time in your career when you faced a leadership challenge that you were unprepared for? And what did you do? How did you learn from that?
Absolutely. So it was a pretty traumatic for me event in my career. So I am an achiever. I have always done really well in school, and I was really prepared for a life where you study hard, you get everything right, you get an A, you get the test. Everything is kind of knowable. And that isn't adequate preparation for life. Life is chaotic, throws you curveballs, you make mistakes. And so this was one of these situations. So we had a very big, I was working in a software company. We had to migrate some content into our software, and it have a big relaunch. It was forum software. This was kind of in the early aughts or the late aughts. So we were getting closer and closer to the date, and we keep running. There are these weird warning signs, like things are taking longer. Things have never taken this long before. This is weird. Why is it taking so long? And then we finally got all of the data migrated over there, and we hit the deadline. And then we launched the software, and within minutes, our software locked up for, this is our company's software, and we had to abort the launch. And so this was actually a pretty public event at that time. There was press, there was things all over the internet. And I was running this project. And so it was just this complete failure. And I had never kind of experienced that level of failure before. And I had some help. some people in the company said, "Look, you're not going to be fired. You're probably not going to be fired, but this is how you deal with this kind of situation." And so I really needed people to kind of take me through that step by step. Well, here's how you talk to customers when something like this happens. Here's how like this is, you made a big mistake, but here's how we're going to fix it. Here's the plan to fix it. And we're going to talk every day and we're going to move through this. And sort of through the course of going through the motions of that, that's when I realized that you can't prepare for every situation, but every situation is fixable. And it's all about the interaction with the customer and the trust and the communication and proving you're doing what you say you're going to do. So lots of lessons in that for me.
Greg, what are the values and principles that have shaped your approach to leadership over the years?
Yeah. So for me, everything is grounded in trust and authenticity. And what I mean by that is when I sit down, there has to be with someone, there has to be a basic level of trust or in that relationship. And so if it's a team member, a lot of this is established one-on-one. And so this is a little bit of an insight. So for introverts, in generally speaking, introverts are going to have a little bit more challenge speaking in a group situation. There's a lot of people talking over each other. Introvert brains are thinking through, trying to process everything at once. And so we're not doing our best thinking. But introverts are really fantastic in one-on-one conversations or small groups. And so I learned earlier on that I want to build and establish trust in one-on-one, if possible, with the people I'm working with. And so that started with team members. And then as I became a leader, it branches out in different people around the company. And then, of course, it extends to clients. Like your opportunities are a little more limited in talking to clients that way. But ultimately, it is about establishing those connections and fostering trust, doing what you say, communicating well about it, and another, I guess, underpinning that is an element of empathy with the other people. No matter what you're doing, I think we all have a tendency to rush in, solve problems, and get on with the job. But to me, the person on the other end of the table or the Zoom call or the phone call, whoever it is, like that's the key. That's why you're there. And if you can make that connection and connect to that person, everything goes more smoothly. If that other person on the other end feels that you're caring about them, that enables the work to go better. It enables everybody to show up as their best selves. So really, it's rooted in the people.
Greg, what's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert? And was there a moment or decision in your professional journey where knowing your personality style and who you were significantly shaped the way that you led?
Yeah. So quick definitions. There, you see a lot of things out there on the internet. A common idea is it's about managing your energy. And so like introverts get energized by being alone and recharging and that sort of thing. And extroverts get their energy out in the world with other people and social events. And that's broadly true. But what's more interesting to me is why is that true? And so it really is, go back to the definition from Carl Jung was the first person who talked about it. And it was about where does your energy flow? For introverts, it's primarily going inward. You're going first into your feelings, your thoughts, your feeling into your senses, and then you're thinking, and then you act and go out into the world. Whereas extroverts, the energy is directed outwards in order to understand it. They act first, they emote, they're interacting with the world, and so that's just that basic bias. And so the way that shows up for introverts is when we get into situations, we're processing internally first and using a lot of brain power. The brain, uses tons of calories, and introvert brains they're more active in the frontal lobes, the thinking, planning, and meaning making centers of the brain. And so we tend to run hot. And so when we go into a social situation, we're processing all the music and the lights and the sounds and the conversations around us, and we're really thinking about them, and that just burns us out. Me personally, I go into one of these situations and I'm like an hour and a half, and then I kind of hit a wall, and I just need to either take a break or ideally go home. Whereas, extroverts, they just go and go and go because their brains are entering kind of an ideal state in that environment. So you had a second part of your question is what was the moment when I realized all of these things about the self. It is sadly not very long ago because I was working on that program of just, try harder. I was staying up all night and kind of just gritting my teeth through these kinds of situations. And so it really turned around for me is at the point when I reached senior leadership, reporting to a CEO, working with executives and a lot of very extroverted executives. And it was just so stark at that point how differently they were wired from me. And I had started doing some personal transformation work, spending a lot more time in meditation, really trying to understand and accept these parts of myself. And then I came across this literature and then finally all snapped into place. I was like, oh no, I'm really wired differently. This is who I am. That's who they are. There don't seem to be a lot of leaders who look like me or act like me. But if you look into history, there's all kinds of them. You look to political leaders. I don't like to talk about recent politics, but if you go back, you think about Martin Luther King or Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, Eleanor Roosevelt. These are all people who are primarily introverted minds or highly sensitive minds, and they led differently. As I rose to these other roles, I realized I needed to develop ways to bring some of the things that were primarily internal. I was always good at writing, and I realized that I could get all my ideas out on the page. And even this is earlier on in my career, and that I could write these emails and I could write documents and things, and that I could have influence that way. But in more senior roles, you have to lead meetings and you have to lead debates and you have to participate in these things where I was initially more challenged. And so one of the things that introverts can do is to leverage in their planning time, in their preparation time for those events. And that it kind of levels the playing field in a way. So you're spending your time where you're at your optimal capacity, carefully thinking things through. You kind of sketch out, how am I going to be in this meeting, in this situation, and then be prepared for the script to get turned upside down. Just the act of preparation really sets you up for so much more success in that regard. So preparation is really important for introverts. Then I think it's seeking out situations that are going to develop some of these qualities because well, I'll finish that. Yeah. So for example, leading meetings. If you have an opportunity to lead a meeting, that's really a fantastic place for an introvert because you're assigned to that role now. Everyone expects you to lead, start the meeting, kick off, moderate, and there's not this idea, or I guess there's more of a reason for you to be jumping in more than you might naturally want to. So that's a good place to start and develop those skills.
Greg, do you believe that there are certain non-negotiables when building a healthy, high-performing team and culture?
Absolutely. So, I mean, for me, kindness is non-negotiable. So I think people get heated. There's conflict at work. There's always going to be conflict and that's healthy. And it's important for people to deal with that conflict head on. And so that's another thing where I was more conflict averse earlier in my career. And I got to the point where I realized that the conflict is the stuff. Like that's the stuff of leadership. You need to go straight for that and address that head on as much as possible. And in my mind, there's never any valid reason for unkindness. Emotion comes up, and yeah. But I think anything that is abusive, anything that, it really comes down to really unkind needs to be addressed immediately because what is the environment that you want to be working in? Where people are most safe and most productive and they're going to do their best work is when they do feel safe. They feel supported and that, we're all in this together and they're working towards a common goal. So I do think it's very important it starts in the hiring process. Who are the people you're bringing in? But it also goes into the norms day by day. What example are you setting? What are you as the leader allowing people to do, or, in a sense, to get away with? And how are you as the leader? What are you doing? And how are you treating people and interacting with people? That has a lot of impact.
Greg, how can a leader balance delivering results with caring for people, their growth, their well being, their motivation?
Yeah, they should not necessarily be in conflict. I mean, there are things that are, running into evenings or, weekends. There may be periods of time where the work-life balance gets, out of skew, where people aren't able to take care of themselves. But I think it is a competitive advantage to treat your people really, really well and to make people understand what they're working for, feel very valued for their contributions. That is only going to increase the quality of their output and what they do. And they're going to bring more of themselves into the workplace, into the jobs. And it's kind of the fundamental thing where your work and your life aren't separate. We get imbalances when we treat these as separate things. This is your life. You're here 8 hours, 10 hour, whatever it is per day. Like, this is your life, and if you're not taking care of yourself, or you're not going to do your best work, and if your workplace isn't conducive to you taking care of yourself, you're not going to do your best work. And people really respond to a more caring, more supportive environment.
Greg, I'd like to talk about strategy, innovation, and decision making for leaders. How do you approach strategic decision making when times are uncertain?
Yeah, it's super uncomfortable to make bets, and you do have to make bets. So that's probably the number one thing about strategy, is that in a sense, you're making a bet. You're taking a chance. You're charting a path. And that might change. You might have to shift your strategy, but you won't get anywhere unless you're taking a definite position on what I think the market is going to do, how I see products shaping up. And this is how we win. This is how we get ahead. And this is so there's a theory, there's a thesis, and you get everybody to rally around it. We'll let the chips fall where they may.
Greg, what role does innovation play in your leadership, and how do you encourage that risk taking without letting things spiral?
Yeah, for me, a lot of it is I think about it as a portfolio approach, where the highest strategic level, you have to chart a course. We think we're going to win in this market with these products, for these reasons that are differentiated for this or that way. And then if you're running business, you've got a core business, core customers that you need to satisfy as well. So you need to decide, what percentage of this total are we allocating for innovation? So maybe it's 50, 60%. We're just keeping the lights on because, making sure our paychecks come in and we survive another day to grow and win and with the new things. And then you're making strategic bets with whatever, 30, 40%, depending on how you're looking at it. And you're also needing to look at different time frames. And I think this will vary by your industry, but innovation, there's the long-term innovation, and then there's a series of things. McKinsey originally had this Horizon framework, Horizon 1, 2, and 3. And Horizon 1 is your core business, and this is what you're keeping going. Horizon 2 is something that's a little bit more matured. And then Horizon 3 ideas are like, these are wilder bets. And so you're really allocating a little bit of your resource to each of these, but you want to have the next thing and the next thing lined up and being developed and worked out with your customers as you go.
So I hear it said all the time from great leaders that the only thing that is constant is change. And so during times of rapid change, how does a leader stay aligned and focused on the mission with all the chaos, the things that don't go right? What do they do?
Right. What I've seen from a lot of really effective senior leaders is they tend to develop some kind of mindfulness practice, a meditation practice. And so that was a really key part of my transformational work. I had meditated I'm probably going back 15, 20 years that I've been doing that, but getting really serious about that and also thinking about that as it's a foundation for how I want to be in meetings and how I want to be throughout my workday. And so I get up, I meditate every morning. This morning I got a little extra time. I got an hour in. It really grounded me. You typically you can bring a lot of that calm and presence of mind through most of your day that way. I think me personally, I need to find a way to top up or something, at midday or in the afternoon. What that practice does is it gives you equanimity when things get tough, when situations arise, when tempers arise. You can be the one in the meeting who can say, who doesn't get carried away in the emotion, and you can ask questions and you can take a little bit of a higher perspective on things, and it's a calm that it supports everybody.
Greg, I'd like to get a little bit of advice and wisdom and practicality for our leaders out there. If there's an introvert that you came into contact with and said, Greg, I'm stepping into leadership for the first time, what do I do?
Well, I would probably offer to be a mentor, because I think that's the number one thing that someone just starting out really needs. It's important to have someone who believes in you and believes in your capabilities, because it's going to be pretty easy to find some kind of extroverted leader who says, "Oh, you don't fit the mold. Forget about it." Or give you advice that is ill-suited for you. It's like, speak up more. Act more confident. These are very common things that people will say, which is like, well, that's really not super helpful. So finding someone who sees you, understands that introverts can be leaders. In fact, there are introverted leaders all around you. I like to say we're hiding in plain sight. So it's find one, because that's another thing we don't like to self-promote. So that's a start. And then it's starting to see what are ways that in your current role that you can start to demonstrate leadership and thought leadership. Because chances are, if you're interested, you have ideas and thoughts. So how do you circulate them and get them better known? So it's leveraging your strengths like writing, it's developing rapport, one-on-one conversations, one-on-one relationships throughout the company. That's also helpful for meeting situations, because if you go into a meeting and you don't really know the people, then it's a different feeling than when I sit in the room and like I know all these people and they like me and respect me, and that totally changes the dynamic. So it's like building a web or a network of people who get you, because they're not necessarily going to get your full personality, right there on the surface in every meeting, but it does help them understand where you're coming from. So then from there, it's opportunities like leading meetings, opportunities for public speaking. Very important thing I forgot to mention. Things like public speaking, speaking up for introverts. Introversion is different from shyness. There is overlap in the fact that a lot of introverts are shy, but not all introverts are shy. And shyness is something, it's fear, it's social anxiety, and it's something that can be overcome. Introversion is hardwired. Introversion, extroversion, you're not going to change that. That's your wiring. But fear is something that through experience, exposure therapy, you do a little bit more, do a little bit more. Any introvert can become a public speaker, but you got to start small and you got to start with doing things that aren't going to overwhelm you. So you build up slowly. So that's an essential thing and part of the advice I'd give your young aspiring leader.
So a follow-up to that would be, personally for you, are there any books that you would recommend? Is there a mentor that you have had or do have, and how did that come about? Or maybe an experience that's been influential for you?
Well, I'll start out with the book question, because this Susan Cain's Quiet. It's subtitled "The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking." So by the way, have my own podcast. It's called the Powerful Introvert Podcast. And I talk about exactly this subject. Really, my goal is to help aspiring introverted leaders and give them tools and hopefully the inspiration and role models that I would have liked to have seen, or I wish my younger self had when I was starting out earlier in my career. And so I've had the fortunate of talking to a lot of authors, speaker coaches, just people in business. And one thing really stands out. This book was published in 2012. This marked a turning point for a lot of people where before this book came out, people didn't really have a sense of, we had the term introvert, but didn't really understand what it was or, why. And so for me, this was kind of the one book that helped me understand really my place in the world and that it's okay to be an introvert and, all these things about like shyness or the fact that it's culturally determined. Like in America, we have these views and it's like water. We just assume that introverts, extroverts are the leaders and introverts but in Japan and Asia, like it's really the reverse. In China, the kid who's going off and talking and the center of attention is considered the fool. And, so introversion is really much more highly valued there. And even in, think about the United States and go back to when we were in an agrarian society, things were organized around small villages, and the quiet, upstanding citizen was considered the ideal. It wasn't really until the 20th century and industrialization, this whole idea around the salesman culture and the extrovert really became the ideal.
Man, I love it. And for my audience, make sure that you download and listen to Greg's podcast. I love it. I've listened to a couple episodes already, so I appreciate that, Greg. Is there any last words of advice that you'd like to give my leadership audience right now? How can they be better today?
Right. Well, I really think that paying attention to personality differences is important. But really, it's for everyone as a leader. If you're making your meetings, the way you operate safer or more inclusive for anyone who is quiet for any reason, and there are other reasons why people might be quiet or not contribute, that's good for you. That's ultimately it's good for you, but it's good for everyone because you are, if you think about the statistics, so 30 to 50% of people are introverts. There's another like 20, 30% people are highly sensitive. You have people who, for whatever reason, they're not comfortable speaking out. If you're not getting their ideas, you're holding yourself back. You're not realizing your full potential. And so that's really what it's about to me is like, if we make this, and that's where I get to, if we make this more inclusive, you get better innovation, you get better ideas, and people have put more of themselves into their work. You just get a much more pleasant, but also more profitable workplace.
Well, my guest has been Greg Weinger, the host of the Powerful Introvert podcast. Give it a listen. It's incredible. To our listeners, if you found this episode helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. We give you all the good stuff, and it's free. So until next time, Greg, congratulations on the podcast, and I hope to have you on again soon.
Thanks so much, Mo. Great to be here.
Yes, sir.